Today, I am excited to introduce Jim Panton, Managing Director at Panton McLeod Ltd. Welcome, Jim.
Hola, Javier, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien. Your accent is amazing, I have to say.
I'm only on day 47 of Duolingo, so I'm surprised that my accent and pronunciation is okay.
Brilliant. Well, I'm Spanish and I can tell you, it's a bona fide, it's
Oh, gracias.
yeah. Now, Jim, thanks for being with us today here. My first question to you is, you're in the business, the water quality business, right?
Correct. Yeah.
How do you end up in this business? Take us through the journey.
Yeah, it's an unusual journey, Javier. I grew up in South Africa as a born out there. With my father coming from London originally and moving out. And when I first moved to the UK, I accidentally fell into a way of trying to get funding to university that turned into joining the British Army and becoming a helicopter pilot, which I ended up enjoying the prospect of so much that I didn't go to university. I just joined the army and I spent around about 11 to 12 years flying helicopters with the British Army. So that was my start in my career. I then left in order to help settle my family. By that point, I had two and then soon after three children. So we settled in Scotland and I started a kind of new journey. And initially it was in the third sector or charity sector, working with particularly veterans and military charities initially. And then around about 2011, I was helping my father with his business, Panton McLeod, which he'd formed in the 1990s. And I was just as a non-exec director, helping in the sidelines. And we saw the opportunity for me to take over from him and for him to retire because he really needed to do that at that stage of his life. And yeah, that's how it came about, completely unplanned. I've had three careers with the military, the charity sector, and now this business within the water sector. So it's been a very unusual journey, but yeah, that's how it came about.
Wow. So your dad called you in to help him with the business, but you have no business experience for what I gather.
So it's funny you should say that because yes, in terms of direct commercial experience, that is correct. But I made the point to him because, funny enough, he said the same thing at that stage. That when you work in the charity sector, I was chief exec of two large charities. One was the Scottish Poppy Appeal, and then the second one was the charity called Erskine, providing care facilities for veterans. And these are 5 million initially and 25 million turnover a year businesses. So they're very commercially orientated. And I think the not-for-profit tag is unfair. It's just not surplus going out to in terms of profits to shareholders. It's you're still trying to run the business as a profitable entity where you reinvest all of the earnings back into the business. So there was some relevant experience there, but within the sector itself, certainly the water industry and being a very heavily regulated industry between water quality regulation, environmental, financial regulations that all apply to the water industry. I had zero experience in that whole area.
So there was a pretty steep learning curve, business and then industry-wise, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I really concentrated initially on processes. We had a good team that my father had built. They just carried on doing what they were doing. They knew the industry, they knew the services that we provided, and I was learning from them as we were going. But we had a huge amount of work to do in terms of internal processes, setting up a proper CRM system. Again, that was a good charitable translation because a fundraising database for fundraising and donations is the same as a CRM system for sales. So those concepts all came across, and really just setting up our financial system, our banking, our internal systems and processes. There was so much that needed to be done. My dad passed away sadly earlier this year, but he was an incredibly brave and incredibly just go get him at any kind of. He did things that other people just would never dream of doing. He just had almost no concept of the risks. When he saw an opportunity, he would just go for it. And I used to say to him at the time that there was no way I could have started the business from scratch like he did. But we reached a point where, because he was so gung-ho and always looking for the new thing, he didn't really have the mindset to build what he had achieved. And so it was a really neat segue across to me, because I didn't think he could have taken the business on much from where he was, but I certainly couldn't have started it. So the combination of the two things came together really well.
That's a very, very interesting point. So would you say your dad is a visionary?
He was just mad. I think that's the simplest thing to
Sorry?
say. He was just mad. He was
Visionary. Vision. You have to be mad, you know.
exactly, and in a very positive way. He saw opportunities where everyone else just didn't see anything.
Yes.
And half the time, I mean, and I think this is that fail fast concept that you hear about in the entrepreneurial world. He failed a lot, and he started Panton McLeod when he was 54. I turned 56.
54.
Yeah, I turned 56 in a couple of days' time, and a couple of years ago, when I realized I was the same age that he was when he started this business, I thought to myself, how the heck did he do that? But he did it because he had been round the block several times.
That's a wonderful story.
He'd got businesses going, and then they hadn't quite worked, and he'd reset and come again, and eventually he did it.
Yeah, that shows you. I heard somebody say, failure only happens when you give up.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
And he never gave up. In fact, even after he retired, he never gave up, and our styles were always so different that I always felt that we would never really gel well in terms of working together. So the deal was he would retire and I would take over. But he was determined to keep going, and he kept wanting to be involved, and I had to keep him informed all the time of what was going on. So he never gave up right to the very end.
So when you joined the business, how old was he when you joined?
How old was my father?
Yes.
Yeah, he was 70 something, early 70s.
Interesting. And you joined, and he carried on in the business while you...
No, not for long. A few months.
Only a few months.
Yeah, I worked together with him as a non-exec for a year or two, and then when I took over, when I came in full time, he retired, and I used to go and see him. He lived near the office, so I used to go and see him once a week for a cup of tea and tell him everything that was going on. And he was always determined to get back in, even though he was retired, and I had to keep reminding him that he was retired. So yeah, he was a hard grafter, and that's how it came about, because I don't think many other people could have achieved what he did in the end.
Was he kind of your mentor while you were?
I think probably not, because half of the things he did were just crazy, and sometimes you've got to have people who do that, and I've just never been wired in that way. I always admired what he did, but I never tried to follow that kind of path. You can't be something you're not, and he was someone that I wasn't, and I could never really follow that same path.
Yes.
But I was able to take what he created and then build on it.
Okay, there is a book, this one, Rocket Fuel. It's based on the model of EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system. And I mentioned this book because it's about the visionary and the integrator functions in a business. When they work together, you get rocket fuel. And by the sounds of it, your dad was a mad, crazy visionary. He will see opportunities, ideas, and that happens in many businesses, and that can lead to chaos. Okay. Yeah. You go to a meeting with 20 ideas, and you need an integrator, somebody behind you integrating your vision. And anyway, so that you come across more as the person who executes and puts processes in place. And is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I think my military background and officer training, a lot of that was coming through in that whole thinking. The charity sector as well required good governance and yes, really kind of strong processes so that you could justify what you were doing to a wide group of stakeholders. So all of that played into what I brought to the business, I think, in the end. But yeah, I don't think we were the visionary and integrator were there at the same time, but it worked together very well for one to take over from the other.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So You mentioned when we spoke last week, when you made a decision, you mentioned the word naivety, right? That was the context. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I think you were asking me at the time how I had or why I made the jump. What was my thinking when I changed careers as dramatically as I did twice? And I said I think that there was an element of young naivety in terms of not really appreciating, and perhaps there's a bit of my dad coming through there, not really appreciating all of the risks. If I'd stopped and thought about it for a while, I would have probably
Back
paused
out.
and hesitated too long.
Yes.
But I think the one thing again that the military did for me as from a officer and a kind of leadership management training point of view was it built huge confidence. Sometimes too much actually, and I think the combination of enormous confidence in my own abilities, which later on I found sometimes to not quite be as what I thought they would be, but by that point you're committed, you're in, and there's no point in pulling out. You're on the way down the slide. You might as well just get into the aerodynamic position and go with it. The momentum's going. If you try and pull out, you're going to have a problem. So yeah, I think I just assumed everything would always be okay, and went for it and try to make the most of it.
Well, that's a nice blend in your skill set and attributes as a person, to take these bold steps, but also have the other side, and of putting processes in place to scale the business and putting, the rationale behind it.
It definitely changes with age, though, and I think I wouldn't want to do it again.
Okay.
I've changed.
Why is
careers
that?
dramatically.
Why is that?
I think you become more aware of frailties and risks and that naivety disappears. You start to see things that
Reality. Yeah.
you didn't see before. You see the worst case situations more, and they play on your mind a little bit more.
Yes.
Yeah, you start to fear the things that could go wrong more than you used to when you were younger. And I think again back to the military, there's a reason why lots of military people are very young is because they don't really appreciate risk and fear things.
Yes.
And their responsibilities, I guess, are not quite the same as when you're older.
Correct.
And there's more to lose later down the line.
That's yeah. And the level of energy is different and so
definitely.
on. But it's amazing how some people have started their business. I mean, McDonald's, Roy, the guy who took McDonald's.
Yes,
He was
I can't quite remember. I saw the movie.
Yeah, the founder. Yeah, brilliant. He started when he was 54, maybe. Same as your dad. And also the chicken business, KFG. Is it
KFC?
Yeah. So he was 60 plus. It's incredible. These guys, brilliant.
Well, no shortage of energy from any of those folks, including my father. But I guess if it really came to it, if I had to, I could do it. But I'd probably rather not now.
Yeah. Well, you're on the way out in a way, right?
Well, yeah, it's a heck of a thing to take on board. Late 50s. But when I'm out and about with my friends now, my wife and I be with friends, and often the discussion is around retirement. And I keep trying to say to myself, why are we talking about this? There's still so much of our lives left. Let's focus on what we can still do.
Yeah, exactly. Now you mentioned about, if I remember well, you hated the question, do you want to sell?
Yeah.
On the business. And yet that's what's happened, right? But at the time, I'm not thinking about that. I just want to grow the business and so on. There are people who will be watching this recording who are thinking of selling the business at some point. Their exit strategy is to add value, grow the business, and then sell it, cash out, and maybe set up another business or retire or whatever. What's your experience? I mean, everybody has a different journey, but the fact is that you've been in that journey, okay? And what can you share with us about, what it takes to sell a business?
Yeah, so I guess with that in context, we were acquired by a company called Stonbury early this year, February this year. So that's now about 10 months ago now. It took about 9 months between the first conversation and closing the deal, which was a heck of a process when you hadn't been through something like that before. So that's a context. And I guess it comes back to motivations in life and what you're all trying to achieve when you start or get involved in different things. And I had always, again, I keep referring back more than I was expecting to my past, but when I was in the military or in the charity sector, those were jobs, and you just did jobs because they were the right thing to do. It was good to have a sense of purpose, and I felt I had a sense of purpose in both of those careers. But there was no exit strategy. You don't have an exit strategy if you're in the military or in the charity sector from a commercial point of view, anyway. And then not long after starting with Panton McLeod, I'd be involved with entrepreneurial types and going on learning and development programs, which were very entrepreneurial and business growth focused. And people would be saying, "What's your exit strategy?" And at first I didn't even know what they meant. But when I eventually understood what they meant, I really struggled to answer it, and I felt I was failing to not have a clear answer. And eventually I decided, no, it's actually okay to not have a clear answer. I was comfortable with options, including retiring and someone else carrying on with while I kept my ownership, or a management buyout perhaps, or eventually being acquired at some point. So we were just trying to grow and be profitable, and enjoy the journey really, and allow circumstance to come to us. Now, maybe that's a mistake. I don't know. I think it depends on the person, it depends on the business, it depends on what your objectives are. But that's what I settled on in the end and became comfortable with that. And in the end, we were approached. We were approached by a few organizations. We turned down a couple initially because it wasn't right for us or didn't feel like the fit was good. But when we started talking to Stonbury last summer in middle of 2023, it suddenly started to feel right. And if not slightly early, for us and for me, but it felt right, and it just felt like it wasn't an opportunity that would be a good thing to necessarily let go and pass us by. So after a huge deliberation, we went for it. So I don't really have a clear single answer for anyone else. I think it really depends on your individual aspirations, your individual circumstances, and a lot of other things around you, your fellow directors and shareholders and family, and there's so many other things that come into it.
I say this because there are many business owners whose sole purpose is to sell the business and cash out, and it can be an arduous journey when you go through the due diligence.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Obviously, that's a fantastic aspiration.
Yes.
And you see and hear a lot about people who are on that journey, and arguably we've entered that world to some extent because we're now part of a bigger group. They have investors. Our owners have investors, and we're part of a bigger machine now that's looking at growth and acquisition, or growth and selling. So there's a more direct path now that we become a broader part of. But from a small to medium-sized business, well done to those guys who can do that. And I would have probably liked my father suited that world. I'm not sure that it necessarily was straight up my street, but I think my aspirations and sense of purpose is probably broader than just getting the big financial win. But for some, that's what drives them, and credit to them for that.
Yeah, very good. So in your journey, what's been one of the biggest challenges you had to face and overcome?
Well, if we talk about my time in the business specifically, there's probably two or three. I think initially resetting the business after my father, so changing the mold, changing the way that the company functioned. Some of the folks in the team changed eventually just because they were part of a machine he'd created, and I was creating something slightly different. So that was hard. I felt a huge obligation to my father and his legacy and his team and his system, but at the same time I was trying to change it. So that was quite difficult, particularly when I was going to see him and updating him on what we were doing. If I was changing things that he put in place that needed some explaining. So that was probably one of the tougher things. Another bit I think would be, as I already alluded to earlier, the learning the industry and the I mean a massively regulated environment that our clients operate in, and the factors that they are running to in terms of the beat of the drum that they have to function. We have to fit in with that, support them, and be able to help them to get through the challenge they've got of providing pure and wholesome water to their customers, to you and I at our houses and businesses, and at the same time meet all their regulatory obligations, many of which are actually conflicting with each other. So it's not an easy thing for them to do that, and it was quite a challenge to actually understand and learn that when we were providing services to them. And then, I mean, not least, I mean, included in that, I would add that obviously the public opinion of the water sector right now is at a bit of a low, to do with sewage and public ownership and private ownership and shareholders within the water sector. So there's quite a lot of focus going on within that. So understanding all that has been quite difficult over the years, but I feel I've got a really pretty good grip on it now, that I've been in the sector for a while.
Yeah, brilliant. No, that's excellent. Now, books. Is there any book? I always ask the question, any book that you've read that had an impact in your life or you found very, very good that you would like to share with the audience today?
Yeah, I probably have a handful. I don't read as much as I would like to, but my team often roll their eyes when I say that I've read a book and I've got a couple of ideas I want to discuss with them, and they go, here we go again. So perhaps they don't want me to read as much as I do, but I feel I would like to read more. So I'll throw in a few if that's okay. It's going back a little while into my 30s, that I was actually still in the military when I was introduced by my wife, funny enough, who'd heard it being talked about on the radio. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey it came into my life at a time when I really needed that kind of restructuring of how I approached day to day. Have you got it there? And there it is. Yeah, perfect. Absolutely brilliant book. I think it'll last the test of time forever. It feels like it's it's been around so long and so well established that it's probably a bit passé now, but actually I just thought that was an amazing thing and I can still tell you big chunks out of it, which I remember very clearly. Others that I've been interested, that have been helpful for me would be The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Death by Meetings is another one by him. Drive by Daniel Pink. The whole concept of motivation coming from autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I really found that very fascinating. But the one I'm going to bring in as a kind of main answer to your question is a book I read recently called Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. And it's the concept of what he learned running the Special Forces operations in Iraq and Afghanistan as a US general, and maybe the fact that it's someone who's taken military experience into a commercial context really resonated for me particularly. But it's the idea of really kind of discarding traditional wisdom from what you might call a kind of pursuit of mechanical and hierarchical efficiency, and creating something that's more about organic adaptability and being able to adjust. When I've explained it to my team at work, the business team that I work with, I equate it to a football team. Everyone knows what their position is when they go on the pitch, but they also know that depending on what's happening in the game, they're going to be playing in a different part of the field. So if you're very, very much on the attack and you're scoring lots of goals, everyone's going to be forward, and the defenders are probably going to chance their luck at scoring a goal or two. If you're heavily under pressure, everyone's in the kind of proverbial parking the bus in front of the goal. So what you do depends on what's going on around you, and how you work together with others depends on what the order of the kind of challenge of that moment is. So that's been quite instrumental for us as a business. We've used it a lot recently
Yes.
And there's four kind of key building blocks to that, which is firstly building trust within your team. Secondly, all having a kind of common purpose and understanding what you're working on together. That then drives what's called empowered execution. So everyone's able to make decisions at lower levels because they trust each other and they understand what they're all trying to do. And then finally, a kind of shared consciousness of being able to communicate in a way where everyone knows what everyone else is doing. And again, the football analogy comes in. You can see what everyone's doing. In business, you can't really see what everyone's doing, particularly in a hybrid working world.
Yes.
And you have to have systems in place so that everyone knows what everyone else is doing.
Yes.
So you can react to that.
You mentioned a book, which I love, actually. I haven't read Team of Teams, but I made a note now. But you mentioned this one, the five functions of a team. And one of my favorite quotes here, I'm going to read it because it's quite amazing. If you could get all the people in an organization rowing in the same direction, you could dominate any industry in any market against any competition at any time. Wow. And coupled with that, Jim Collins said in Build to Last, maybe, a culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, as reinforcing your point of teams, you know, how important that is.
So culture and values has been something that I've been really big on. And again, I think it maybe comes from my background, but from the very early stages of my time in the business, I was determined that we would be focused on building a culture that worked for us, basing it on solid values. And these are easy things for corporates to stick on a wall on a poster. But the challenge is to turn those into something that actually means something to you, and that means something to the business. People understand them and know what that's all about. And we've just been through a resetting of our vision, mission, and values. So it's something again very topical for me and for us as a business, because I think you've got to get that right. And then behind that, I think you've got to build it around that. Where one of the things I talk about with my team quite a bit is putting people before profit is pretty important, because the profit will follow if you put people before profit. If you put profit before people, it's possible that people might not follow. And I think we talk about three legs of a stool that go with that. So you've got the people element, you've got the client, and you've got financial stability. And those three things, which is your profit perhaps, combined with all the other financial activities. And if those three things are equally prioritized, you can grow a stable platform. But if one of the three legs is prioritized, the platform becomes unbalanced. If you prioritize finance and profit over everything else, you're not looking after people, they're going to leave you, everything's going to deteriorate. If you're not looking after your clients, your finance isn't going to hold up. So that you have to have an even balance on all three. And a lot of businesses get overly focused on one of those. Most often it's the profit or the finance piece that drives everything, and it upsets the level playing field for the other two.
Yeah, it's a bit like a three-legged stool. Yeah,
correct.
If you remove one leg, you fall. No,
or even if one leg is much bigger than the other, it's not very stable.
Yeah. Brilliant. So just to wrap up, what's if you could spend a day in the life of who you go for?
So this was unbelievably difficult. Thankfully, you gave me a heads up on this, and I there was a name that jumped into my head straight away, and then I thought it was too obvious, and I wanted to do something less obvious. But I've come back to my first instinct, and that's Nelson Mandela. And the reason I chose Nelson Mandela, apart from all the obvious reasons that everyone would be very familiar with, what an incredible and influential human being for the whole world, really. But the reason I've gone with it specifically is because as I mentioned, I grew up in South Africa in the 70s and 80s. It was a name we knew of. He was in prison. He went through the Rivonia trials. I lived in a place called Rivonia. So I was possibly very, very young. I can't remember the exact dates off the top of my head, but I was very young near there when he was sentenced. But we weren't allowed to see pictures of him. We weren't allowed to hear his voice. We didn't know anything about him apart from that he was this evil terrorist. And I remember crowding around, and as a teenager, a small tape player listening to an illegal copy of the song Free Nelson Mandela, which you could get arrested for if you were in possession of that song. So I then moved to the UK in the late 80s, and to a certain extent, it kind of froze my experience of South Africa in time. I've been back as many times, but always as a tourist or a visitor. My experience as growing and being part of the South African journey kind of ended in the late 80s. And earlier this year, I was lucky enough with my wife on holiday to go to Robben Island for the first time. And hundreds of thousands of people have visited Nelson Mandela's cell in the Robben Island prison. But what was really poignant for me was not only seeing that along with everyone else, but having a guide who was one of the prisoners at the same time. And he told us his story, and it was so similar to my timeline in terms of places. And I remember him saying, I was here, and this happened, and I was there, and that happened. And I was thinking to myself, maybe 5 years younger than him, but I was thinking, I know where I was then. And I was actually quite close to where he was, but our lives could not have been more different if you had tried. And it was simply because of the color of our skin that he had such a different life. And I was completely overwhelmed by that at the time. So that's my person. I would just love to spend a day just talking to and understanding a little bit more on a personal perspective who Nelson Mandela was.
Yes, I think it was he who said, I never fail, I either win or learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful mantra. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Jim, what can I say? Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for being part of our show and for being so candid in sharing your experience with us today. Thank you so much.
De nada, yeah. Thank you very much.
Adiós, amigos.
Been a pleasure. Adios.